What's up everybody, my name is Bryce, aka DubsNotSubs, and in today's video, we are going to be going over Blades of the Immortal. What I thought about it, what I liked, what I didn't like, and before we get into this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you feel that I've deserved it. But without further ado, let's get right into this video. So before we get into this, I want to say that this is not really a review, it's more of a discussion about what I liked and didn't like. I could think about it critically if I really wanted to, but I just kind of wanted to talk about it because you guys told me to read it. I want to give you back my opinions without a critical thing. So this is all subjective for what I'm about to say. There's not going to be really a lot of objectivity in it. There probably will be with in and out, but overall, this is just going to be my personal opinions. And without further ado, let's get actually right into the talk. So, as many of you guys know, this was actually a series that was voted on by you guys to choose, and actually right now I'm also doing another contest to go vote on that to see if you want to pick my next series, because as I said, I will do whatever series gets the most, and then I make a review on it, just like I'm doing like this. Well, a review, discussion about it, but we're going to be getting into it right now with the story of Monji and Rin, and that is the two main characters that this follows. Now, what happens is Monji is the 100-man killer. He actually has immortality also, and this 100-man killer thing is because one night he was running from the Shogun, and he ends up slaying 100 cops, and within the 100 cops, we end up seeing that he slays his sister's husband. Now, this ends up destroying his sister's mental state because she ends up witnessing the death of him, and she kind of goes insane. And the first chapter kind of opens up with we see his sister and kind of how broken down he is, and how he's just kind of, or how she's broken down, and how he's just kind of protect her and do all this. And what happens at the end of the first volume, or the first chapter, is she ends up getting brutally murdered in a really horrific way, and a really sad life that she ended up having to live. I really feel bad for her. But she ends up dying, and Monji ends up swearing by her grave to kill 1,000, I believe it was 1,000 bad people. And so, as we continue, we meet Rin. Now, Rin has this whole thing where her family owned a dojo, and her dad was the leader of her family, was very peaceful until one day, Anatsu ends up showing up one day with the Itorui and slaying her parents, and a lot of other heinous things happen in there that I can't get into, because damn, they're gonna get me messed up if I do it. And anyway, so she ends up throwing revenge around him, and she goes to kind of a journey to destroy him and end his life and all this. So as she's journeying, she ends up meeting the old woman that gave Monji his immortality. And so she ends up telling her to hire him as a bodyguard, so she finds him, and they kind of start off their journey where he ends up paying for that, and the rest of the story unfolds. Now, also, just so you guys know, I will be talking about the story a lot, so if you don't want to know some like spoilers within it, I would recommend probably clicking away, because I'm going to talk about it fairly open, the entire thing, because I want to talk about the whole thing. So let's probably start off with the art. Now, a lot of people really like the art, and I do too. I think it's very good. I think it really works with the style of this series, and I think that overall it's very good. However, and probably a lot of people aren't going to like me saying this, there were a couple panels where I couldn't tell what was going on in the fight scenes, and well, overall, it wasn't really a big problem. There was only a few, right? But there were a couple cutscenes and panels where I couldn't really tell what the hell was going on. And now, it's easy to nitpick this kind of thing because there really isn't anything wrong with the art ever, besides like these few panels in the fight where I'm just kind of like staring at it, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. But overall, I think the art is top tier and it deserves all the praise it gets. And I know a lot of people talk about how great the fight scenes, how choreographed they are, and there are certain scenes where you're just like, boom, what the hell? It's just so good. It's like so well done and well animated. There's this one where Anatsu goes into a dojo. I forgot what the other dojo's name was, but he basically challenges all the people within the dojo who kind of didn't want to follow him because he was taking it over. And the panels where it shows like how the fight goes, like panel by panel, as he's like going around these guys and taking them out, it's so good and so well choreographed. Now, on the other hand, there was a scene where it was, I believe, when they're going for the immortality thing, when they're trying to take over the immortality or discover it, he ends up getting tortured and all this. And during the escape on that, there's like this certain fight where this dude who kind of has it, but he's not really human anymore. It's a bit weird to explain because he doesn't have a name, but basically he's kind of like this super long person. I'll just have a picture up so you guys can realize what it is, and it'd be a lot easier than me trying to charades it or something like that. But anyway, during that fight, I believe it was that fight where there was kind of a couple panels where I couldn't really tell what was going on, and that might have been by design because there was a lot of flooding involved in there, so like, maybe it was part of the confusion, but there are a couple panels where I just couldn't tell what the hell's going on. I straight up spent like 4 or 5 minutes just trying to figure out, man, what is he trying to do with this panel? And I just moved on. And obviously, you're not going to get a perfect panel every time, and it's not really the creator's fault. Kageshimura is absolutely amazing. Did I say his name wrong? I'm going to go look that up to make sure I don't say the name wrong. Alright, so I realized what I did wrong. I set a character instead of the actual art, the actual manga, which is Hiroki Samura. I don't know why I said that. Kageshimura is somebody else in this story who plays a very, very major part in the second half, and we'll probably get into that in a little bit. But overall, the art was absolutely amazing. It was top tier. 100% deserves all the praise it gets. I cannot disagree with that. And my god, some of like these winter scenes towards the end of the volumes and like towards the end of the series, absolutely insane. They're so well done and so good. But without further ado, let's actually get on to how I feel about the story. Now, with the story, I 100% think it was paced and drawn well for the most part. There was one arc, and that's the Immortality Arc, I felt was dragged on for too long. I think towards the beginning that when they were first trying to show how nobody could get his immortality was dragged on for a little bit too long, because after you meet the first student, you have all that connection, then it fails, and then they keep doing it over and over again. I know they're trying to do it to portray how the doctor is going insane, but what ends up happening is you're like, I get it. I really get it. Can we move on, please? At least that's what I thought. And maybe I'm just a little bit impatient. But for the story, I feel like they could have conveyed it in a much faster way than they did. And maybe I'm just remembering it wrong. But I just remember in the story, that was the only time I felt like I had to power myself through. Because it just felt like they were dragging on he was dragging it on for no reason. I feel like that could have been sped up. But other than that, I really have no problems with the pacing of the story. I think everything else went very smoothly and very well. I think overall, all the characters are also very well done and there's a lot that goes into them, especially with the main characters like Monji, Rin, Anatsu. Then you have the second commander, the Ito Rui, and then you have Anatsu's girlfriend or girl. I don't remember a lot of the characters. There's a fuck ton of characters in this, but what can you do? I'm not the best to remember, but I know what they all look like. That's my biggest problem, is I can always remember what characters look like, but whenever I try to say their names, I'm like, damn, it just escapes me. But anyway, all these characters have so many different levels to them and so many different things to it. Oh, and like Kageshimura also, who I will get into. There's things I didn't like. It was really interesting. I'm going to get into that. I guess that does have to do with the story, but let me finish the characters before I ramble on, because I already am rambling pretty bad. Anyway, the characters are all very well done. They all have a lot that goes into them, and there's a lot more than what you think. There's more than meets the eyes. They're like Transformers. They're absolutely amazing and really engaging characters, and none of the characters there were characters I definitely hated in here, but they were done, I think, by design, and also I think there were reasons you could hate or like this character, and every character kind of had that kind of thing around them where you can either hate or like them depending on what they're doing and how they're portrayed at that moment. And let's get into probably my favorite characters. Obviously, Monji is one of my favorite characters, so is Anatsu. And, you know, just main characters, he did a good job of focusing on them and making them likable, but also dynamic. So, Rin especially is just this hypocrisy throughout the entire thing, and that's done by design. She's such a confusing character, because she doesn't know what she truly wants, and she never really, throughout the story, determines 100% what is truly the right decision, because she sees all this thing on this path of destruction. She goes to try to kill Anatsu, the leader of the Ito Rui, who killed her parents. You see all this kind of, this in her mind, like, why should I be doing this? Why am I doing this? Why is this okay? And she just struggles with that the entire time. And then you get to see a child of a member of the Ito Rui who Monji kills show up later in the story, and see how that actually affects him and what ends up turning into his life. And she becomes the thing that she hates, which is very interesting and shows just how confusing and how realistic the story is, I guess, because in the sense, there is just nothing that, like, it's not straight drawn like a shonen, like a seinen. You don't expect, there's so many twists and turns, because you expect her to stay the good guy throughout this entire thing, but throughout it, she becomes a thing that she hates. She becomes a living hypocrisy of what she is truly against, and she struggles with this and tries to get over it, and it's just really interesting to watch her character try to struggle with this and come over this and come to terms with what she's done, because at a certain point, she's past the point of no return. Even when she talks to Anatsu, it's interesting how Anatsu almost helps her on this path, because he knows what he's doing, and it almost seems like he maybe regrets doing it, but I don't think he does. I think he regrets hurting people, but not what he did to get to where he was. I think he is, they're all so interesting, and there's so many different dynamics you could just break down. I could literally have, like, all the main characters and just make an entire video about how their thought process is, what they did, why they were doing it, and because they're all just so interesting and dynamic. I could spend, like, maybe 3 hours talking about all these characters. But one of the characters I have not talked about, who is one of my most favorite characters in this, is Hyakuren. Now, she is a member of the Mugai Rui. Now, she is a very interesting character, and I'll get into more into the Mugai Rui with this, but basically they are an anti-Ito Rui group formed by the Shogun, and their only purpose is that they're a bunch of criminals who are working off their wages by taking down criminals that the Shogun wants them to, and by earning enough, they're able to buy their freedom at a certain point. But they are working there, and their objective right now is to destroy the Ito Rui, or that was their original objective. Now, Hyakuren is one of the most important characters in this series, for me personally, because she's just such an interesting character, and you just feel so bad for her and all the hardships she has to go through. And one of my favorite books, if not my favorite volume of this series, is one of the darkest in there, and that's when Hyakuren ends up getting tortured, and it's not my favorite in the sense of like, oh yeah, let's get this fucking torture shit. It's like, no, it's just, it's written and portrayed so well, like you just feel how dark and how serious this situation is, and I think is one of the most well done parts of the actual manga. There is so much emotion and hardship in there, and you get to see Hyakuren's past throughout it, and just all the hardships she faced, and you feel so bad for this character. You just want him to be happy, and you just see all this terrible stuff she's had to go through, and she is just such an interesting character, and my favorite character in this series is probably Hyakuren, through the journey she has to go on and the determination that she has to come up with, and getting over her past, working with herself. She is just one of the most dynamic and interesting characters in this series, and without a doubt, it was weird because I intentionally didn't actually think I was going to like her as a character. I didn't really think I liked a lot of the Mugen Rui, except for one of the people in there who ends up not doing too well at the end of this. Let's just say that. But Hyakuren ended up turning into such an interesting and important character in the series, because throughout it, she has so many other roles and stuff that she plays in. And while she doesn't have the biggest role, she doesn't make the biggest impact, she's always there, and she's always helping in some way. It's almost like Villager B kind of a thing, where you're like, they're not a big part of the story, but without Villager B, the hero would have never found out where to go next. So they're an integral part of the story that you may not even notice, but you do, because she does play a more important part than a Villager B. I guess that's not the best example, because that's like, if she got like one off, because there's a whole thing, a whole nother arc about what happens after she gets tortured. She ends up getting pregnant with actually like the people that raped her and all this, and then you have Gichi trying to convince her to keep it. Oh my god, it just gets real fucked up. Like, I'm just telling you, man, she's just such an interesting character, but she's such a strong character too, and how she ends up coming out on top at the end of this as a better person, and as this it just shows that she, even though she went through like some of the most horrible things ever, unimaginable torture, she was able to recover from it and become stronger because of it. She is just such an interesting character, and without a doubt my favorite character in this entire series. And without Hyakuren, I probably wouldn't rate the series as high. Not to say that if she was gone, I wouldn't think the series is absolutely amazing, but I just, for some reason, she was just such an interesting character, and such a cool character to follow, I guess, with her determination and her whole mind frame. She was just, I don't know. I'm rambling a little bit, but she is something special, and without a doubt, like I said, like probably 5 times at this point, she's my favorite character. But let's get on to Monji and Rin, actually, and we'll talk about Anzu throughout this also, but we gotta talk about their dynamic. Their dynamic throughout this entire thing grows so well and so realistically that you don't even really notice how well they're growing together. It just feels like and flows so nicely as they come from complete strangers to people who have this inseparable bond, and throughout the thing, the people talk about how they're like brothers and sisters, or how that's what they appear like. They end up forging this bond that's unbreakable, where they are the only 2 people who they can truly trust in any situation. She is just, their whole dynamic is what makes this series so great. It's so good, it's so realistic, and it's done and written so well to where you're just like, wow. I mean, you until someone like points it out, and until like you have another like third-party character is like, wow, you guys like really gotten close, and you're just like, wow, that's so true. Like, it just flows so naturally that you almost kind of forget they're going closer, and then you're like, man, they really have gotten a lot better and a lot closer to each other. There's so much where the connection and their just stuff seems so real and so logical, and to the point where if you were in the same situation, you would be in the same, you kind of have the same mind frame, and it just seems so relatable and so realistic in the sense of if you were there, you would also have these same kind of emotions, and they just become this inseparable pair, and they are without a doubt some of the best main characters I've ever seen. Probably the best duo main characters I've ever seen. I don't think there's any other like two main characters that I think could beat them, because they are just such an important part of this story, and they're what makes it so well. They make it so real, and they do so much right where you just want them to succeed. You want not Hyaku Rin, you want Rin to get her revenge. You feel her pain. You want her to finally get it. And Monji's just trying to become a better person and fix the mistakes of his past. And you want him to get there, and you want him to just be a better person. And Anatsu himself is another very dynamic character, because at first he's portrayed as ultimate villain. But with this story, everybody's always more dynamic and different than what they seem like. Anatsu ends up becoming such an interesting character because you can't really blame him for what he's doing, right? But I guess you can, and like the way he's going about it is not in the good. He's not a good person, and it's very clear that he's not. But it's not like anybody else is doing better. It's almost like the Shogun doesn't seem to be doing better than him. They're not like this beacon of morality. And neither is Monji and Rin. They're killing people to get their revenge, just like Anatsu did to the dojo. It's very interesting how nobody's clearly the hero and nobody's clearly the villain. Everybody has their own motives, and everybody has their own reasoning to why they're doing it. It all, in reality, makes sense to why they're doing it. Even though I would say the Shogun seems to be the worst out of all the bunch. Like, at first, I was like, screw the Itarui. Screw them. Let them go out because you're on the side of Monji and Rin. But as things develop, you're like, man, they may not be doing this the right way, and the whole model by the way of the sword no matter what. They're just trying to keep the samurai age alive in a dying era where it's becoming erased. And they're just one of the last relics of this generation, or of that era, where they're just holding on to the last thread that there is before it's finally broken off and we move into the modern era. And you get to see the same thing with Kage Shimura, who is the Shogun's kind of dog. He's higher up in the Shogun, but he's willing to do anything for the Shogun. And you get to see how he is also the last thread of that kind of model in the Shogun. His kind of thought mentality, how he feels about the Shogun, how he has that, like, honor code, seppuku, all this kind of stuff that goes into Kage Shimura. He just would do anything for the Shogun, whether it's right or wrong, because it's the Shogun, and he's sacrificed everything and will do anything for them without a question of a thought, because they are the Shogun, and he trusts himself completely. And then you get to this point where you're like, the Shogun's kind of a dick. Like, the Itarui may be doing bad, but the Shogun ain't doing much better, especially when you see the experimentation and how they just let Kage Shimura just take everybody, and to the point where in this Immortality arc, where at first they're just testing people who are actual on death row inmates, but as there's so many experiments fail, they end up pulling minor criminals, like things that don't deserve death penalties, and just building up on that over and over again until it just gets... God, until you just see how bad the Shogun is, but also it's not really the Shogun's fault. In that way, it's more Kage Shimura and his whole idea, because he wants to do this shit for the Shogun, but it's at any cost. He doesn't care, and the Shogun doesn't know about it. They keep the actual experiments a secret until it gets so bad, and there's a whole arc about how they end up finding out, which is actually one of the best parts of the story. Also, it's actually really well done, and for an arc that I felt was dragging on too long, it came to such a perfect conclusion. And anyway, it's so good. It's just like it shows how bad it is to unthoughtfully and just mindlessly follow authority with no question or reasoning, and also to serve them unconditionally with no question of, is this right? Should I even be doing this morally? Which is something you see the doctor have to go through, who is actually in charge of the experiments, who's actually a very, very interesting character in my opinion. Every character in here is very good. Anytime I mention a character, I'm like, oh, they're very interesting. It's like, no shit, dumbass. But he's actually really interesting because at first he has more of a doctor's mindset, but he's very hesitant about these experiments, and he's also slowly becoming more numb, and then to get himself to be able to do these experiments, he ends up putting actual, like, beaver masks over these people. Like, they put, like, paper plates and put on paper masks, or paper bags, or not paper bags, like, just, like, sacks, and, like, they paint honor faces on them, and just so he could push out of their mind that he's human, so he could use them like animals, because he's so tortured by the fact that he's using humans for these experiments and killing hundreds of people all the time and failing. He goes insane. And then by the end of this arc, when it's all said and done, he finally goes on this path and road of recovery, because he realized and forgot. He forgot what he was doing until the end, when he finally realized why he became a doctor, which was to stop the deaths of people in Japan. He wanted to have people in Japan were too focused on the spiritual aspect instead of real, actual science and actual doctorate. They were too much with spells, too much with like all that like voodoo shit and all that. Not voodoo, actually. I'm just saying like mystical stuff like that, where people just give them like plants and call it a day and like fandom with it. But he's actually more of a scientific person until he went numb with this whole experiment, and he ends up thinking to his inner self and determining for the rest of his life he's going to try to bring real medicine to Japan, so people don't have to suffer through all the same things that his family and the people that he had to watch die go through. So as I'm saying, this story is absolutely amazing. And now the ending. I feel like I have to talk about the ending, because it is absolutely a perfect point for this series to end, and it's done so well. Because what happens is you finally get the final battle. You have Anatsu versus Kagashimura, and just all the stuff that goes on there, and nobody's safe. Really, nobody is safe. You don't know who's gonna die. You don't know who's gonna win. The only part I didn't like about the end is the big dude in there. I'll put a picture up just because I can't remember his name. I didn't really like him, because there was a point where he someone ran through like all her blades at him, and man, he just like shakes his head, and then he like knocks them all conveniently away with his blades. It's like I don't know about all that. But besides that, I think it's absolutely a perfect end for the series. It's so well done. It's so well written. It comes to a perfect conclusion where I don't want to ruin it just in case you guys haven't read it, and I've already spoiled so much for you. This ending is absolutely one of the most memorable endings ever, and it ends so nicely. And even like the actual ending, when you see Rin have to come to terms with how she thought about Monji, but what happens to Monji since he's immortal, how he has to carry on with all the people he knows passes away and has to move into the future, even though he knows what happens, and he knows that all the people he loved and all the people he cared for in that era is going to pass on, and he has to be stuck there to move on. But then you get to see the final panel of how, oh my god, but how Rin, oh god, oh man, I don't want to say it. Okay, don't skip this if you don't want to know the ending, because I have to talk about it. It is so good. What happens at the end, we get to see one of the ancestors of Rin come up as a child and end up bringing this note to say to look for him, and we find out that Rin actually moved on. She ended up having her own family and continuing her bloodline and all that. But we get to see how she finished the knife that Doa gave her earlier, which is, again, one of the best characters in this thing. Doa and her partner was another crazy character. Again, I said I could just talk about the character for hours, and I don't want to do that. And you just see that she finished this knife that Doa gave him. What you're supposed to do within the Ainu religion, if you read Golden Kamuy, you give this knife that you specially carved to the person you love and the person that's special to you. And so at the end, and then the person who has your heart. So at the end, she ends up finally handing it to him, and that's fully carved and fully done, because before it wasn't. So Rin went through the time of actually carving it, and you can just feel the emotions in that blade, in the carvings, and you just know how much she meant to him, and how much they're dynamic, and how much they meant to each other. Is just such a perfect conclusion to an amazing series. And like I said, besides those actual panels that were a little bit blurry, that's the only thing I can complain about this series. And if I was going to give a review score, I'd give it a 9.8, because the only time I can say those panels are the only thing. I can't give it a perfect 10 because of that, but that's the only problem I had with a couple panels where I couldn't tell what was going on. Like anything, and it's not, maybe that's a little bit too nitpicky of me, but overall, besides that one arc, or that one part of the arc that felt like it was a little too rushed, and a couple muddled panels, this is absolutely one of the most perfect series of all time. And there's a reason people talk about why it is so well done and why it is the best manga of all time. It is one of the best written pieces of literature, pieces of entertainment, movie, book, music, anything, any form of entertainment that you will ever read, because nobody's what you think they are. Everybody has their own motives. There are so many interesting thoughts and dynamics and kind of things and ideologies and reasons for what they're doing, and just motives, and so many different things that you could get into with this, that there's so many there's so many video ideas I could do about talking about certain characters, their mindset, what they are, and just what this meaning of this series is. But at the end of the day, It's a story about Monji and Rin going for a story of revenge, and along the way, learning to discover themselves and the bond they form between them. So, anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I always appreciate you watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe if you feel that I deserved it. I always appreciate you guys commenting. And without further ado, I will see you in another video.